What if the 11th Doctor had been played by Peter Capaldi instead of Matt Smith? What if Russell T Davies had written an episode for the 11th Doctor and Amy Pond? And what if Christopher Eccleston had said yes to the 50th anniversary? Believe it or not, all of these things were either planned, written, or came terrifyingly close to happening. To find out how we went from all of that to the era we got, let's dive into the original plans for the 11th Doctor. Before we talk about what could have been, we need to talk about what almost wasn't. The 11th Doctor's era nearly didn't happen at all. Speaking at a festival in 2014, showrunner Steven Moffat revealed the BBC seriously considered cancelling Doctor Who when David Tennant left. They thought Tennant had so completely inhabited the role and brought so many new fans into the series that there wouldn't be any way to follow his act. Moffat said David owned that role in a spectacular way, gave it an all-new, cheeky, sexy performance, and became a national treasure. So the idea that Doctor Who could go on at all in the absence of David was a huge question. Thankfully, Russell T Davies talked some sense into them on his way out the door. Moffat added, "I didn't realize how many people thought it wouldn't succeed at all. That was quite terrifying when I found out about it later." Steven Moffat originally considered the 11th Doctor to be played by a middle-aged actor. He wanted someone who was, in his own words, young enough to run, but old enough to look wise. One of the actors he was hoping to get was future 12th Doctor Peter Capaldi. Imagine that timeline. Capaldi playing the 11th Doctor opposite Karen Gillan's Amy Pond, bringing his intensity and gravitas to the fairy tale aesthetic of Series 5. But then, a 26-year-old actor named Matt Smith walked into the audition room. Moffat recalls, "The moment Matt started that dialogue, with his strange mannerisms and his extraordinary face, he was a hot young guy, but he also looked like he could be your Barney uncle." At 26, Matt Smith became the youngest actor ever to portray the Doctor. Moffat and executive producer Piers Wagner were so impressed by Smith's audition that they completely abandoned their original plan. According to Moffat, the initial plan was to have the 11th Doctor played by a middle-aged man in a piratey outfit. But Matt Smith wasn't happy with that. And Matt Smith contributed heavily to his on-screen appearance, with the tweed jacket, the bow tie, and the braces that would then become iconic. Matt Smith's era was supposed to include several stories that never made it to screen. Matthew Graham, writer of Fear Her, my least favourite episode by the way, was planning a story for Series 5 about an old people's home and a lighthouse that was actually a spaceship. However, Graham's work on Ashes to Ashes stopped him from developing the storyline to the script stage. Robert Shearman, who wrote the incredible Series 1 episode Dalek, was asked by Steven Moffat to write an episode for Series 5. Shearman even attended a Series 5 read-through, but left after feeling he could never get the story right. In a 2025 interview, Shearman mentioned that the story would have been based on The Chimes of Midnight, one of his most beloved Big Finish audio dramas. Jack Thorne, who would later write the award-winning series Adolescence, also worked on an episode for Series 5, which didn't progress much because he too couldn't get it right. And before settling on The Lodger, Gareth Roberts developed a storyline for Series 5 that would have featured a disgraced Sontaran named Strom. The idea reached the draft stage before it was abandoned. All we know is that it was titled Death to the Doctor. And here's the big one. Steven Moffat asked former showrunner Russell T Davies to return to the program to write an episode for the 11th Doctor and Amy Pond. Davies ultimately pitched an episode to Moffat in April of 2010 for Series 6, but it was scrapped due to budget constraints and the heavy visual effects that it would have required. The story sat in Davies' back pocket for over a decade. When Davies reassumed his position as showrunner in 2022, he finally adapted the idea into the episode Dot and Bubble, with the 15th Doctor and Ruby Sunday. So we did eventually get to see the story that Davies planned, just with a different Doctor, different companion, and over a decade later. Even the episodes that made it to screen went through rather significant changes. For the 11th hour, numerous scenes were either cut or changed from draft scripts. One intriguing scene had the Doctor looking at the TARDIS console. A segment will come out from it with the Doctor explaining to Amy that he had just found the TARDIS's steering wheel, claiming he'd been looking for it for over 900 years. This is when Amy would learn about his age. Steven Moffat also debated setting the whole story in Scotland, where he grew up, but ultimately decided on England, in keeping with the notion that Amelia is an unconventional girl. Victory of the Daleks was intended to be the first of several episodes to prominently feature the new paradigm Daleks, with future episodes planned to discuss on what each color-coded Dalek was designed for. However, following the disastrous reception of the new paradigm Dalek's design, these plans were scrapped and the 2005 Dalek design was brought back for their next outing. The new paradigm Daleks were restricted to cameos and eventually jettisoned altogether after Matt Smith left the series. Vampires of Venice originally had a big monster rising out of the water in Isabella's death scene, but that would be too expensive. Stephen Moffat was forced to ask Toby Whithouse to make it invisible. You just see bubbles. It works, you know, it's like Jaws. The less you see of it, the more scary it becomes because you have your own imagination. But you know what is scary? The amount of people that watch these videos that aren't actually subscribed. If you've gotten any value out of this video, please consider subscribing. It would mean the absolute world to me. Anyway, back to the video. For the Hungry Earth, rumor has it Chris Chibnall wanted to redesign the Silurians a step further and reveal that they had always had human-like faces and just wore masks over them in their classic series appearances. Showrunner Stephen Moffat overruled him, however, and instead established that the Silurians here were a different subspecies of the ones seen previously. Chibnall also considered bringing back the Sea Devils in this story, but decided it would be too distracting, because this story was so clearly about the Silurians and what the Silurians want. Chibnall would later get his chance to bring them back in the new series in the 2022 Easter special Legend of the Sea Devils, one of the best episodes to ever be broadcast. An early draft of The Lodger reportedly featured Meglos from the classic series as the villain. The punchline would be that the Doctor had completely forgotten about him over the centuries and wouldn't remember even when prompted, which Meglos would take great offense at. That would have been such a perfect Doctor Who joke, and I can imagine Matt Smith really crushing that delivery. It's a shame it didn't make it in. The Big Bang would have a shot of the village when Amy and Rory take off with the Doctor, which would have shown a family of ducks in a pond as a nod to the 11th hour, where the Doctor notices the duck pond doesn't have any ducks, implying they were taken by the crack in time too, but have now been restored. Series 6 went through changes too. In the original script for The Impossible Astronaut, Amy and Rory were dropped off by truck, but director Toby Haynes altered this to a yellow school bus because he felt it was more distinctly American. It's a small change, but I just wanted to mention it because this is actually my favorite Doctor Who story of all time. The Doctor's wife is one of the more fascinating cases of a script being completely rewritten. It was originally the 11th episode of Series 5 and had to be completely rewritten to feature Rory when pushed to the next series. Neil Gaiman has mentioned significant bits of his scripts never made it to the screen. Originally, House would be revealed as having grown from a spore which entered the bubble universe via one of the cracks in time, which featured heavily throughout Series 5. Gaiman intended the Doctor to glimpse the true House, an enormous mollusk-like entity concealed beneath the asteroid's mantle. And when Amy was sent back to the TARDIS to fetch the sonic screwdriver, she originally found her engagement ring, a version of which appeared in the Lodger. And interestingly, the infamous TARDIS swimming pool would have finally made an appearance, but this was most likely shut down when Karen Gillan mentioned she couldn't swim. For the Almost people, the original script had the real Doctor quizzing the Flesh Doctor about the events of Mind of Evil, and mentioning former companions Jo Grant, Sarah Jane Smith, Romana, Rose Tyler, Martha Jones, and Donna Noble. And the pile of discarded Jennifer gangers was originally intended to just be a pile of bodies, but it was decided that that would be too grim. Instead, we got this weird CGI looking thing. Thank God this isn't grim. That's not grim, Doctor Who. Ay ay ay. The original script also contained a scene where the TARDIS provides the Doctor with another sonic screwdriver after he gave it to the Flesh Doctor, in a similar fashion to the 11th hour. Moving on to A Good Man Goes to War. This episode was originally supposed to have Captain Jack Harkness join the Doctor's army at Demon's Run, but John Barrowman was busy filming Torchwood Miracle Day at the time. It is long rumored that the character of Madame Vastra was created to replace him. Night Terrors was originally set at a hotel hosting a psychiatric conference where patients' phobias would manifest. This was thought, however, to be too similar a concept to the God Complex, which was being produced at the same time. So Stephen Moffat suggested staying in an apartment complex with a young boy instead, completely changing the tone and the scope of the story. Series 7 had its own share of dramatic changes. In Asylum of the Daleks, Rory was originally meant to have a beard which Amy would hate, and he would shave it off at the story's conclusion. Between seasons, Arthur Darvill was appearing on stage as Dr. Faustus, and Stephen Moffat planned to have him keep the beard he had grown for that role. This plan, however, had to be abandoned when they decided to film Asylum of the Daleks alongside Angels Take Manhattan, a story in which Rory definitely does not have a beard. Dinosaurs on a Spaceship originally had Nefertiti knock out the Doctor and give her own life to destroy Solomon's ship, but this was felt to be too similar to other self-sacrificial moments in the series, such as Oswin in Asylum of the Daleks and Karla Jex in A Town Called Mercy. Moffat suggested that the Doctor and Nefertiti could be saved by the TARDIS materializing around them when the missile strikes Solomon's pod. But then Moffat decided that this ending lacked drama, leading to the much darker ending we got, where the Doctor actively kills Solomon. The Power of Three was largely restructured to introduce the invasion storyline earlier. The episode originally began with scenes such as the adventure with Henry VIII and Amy at the engagement party. The episode also originally ended with Amy and Rory deciding to take one more trip despite Brian's unease. But Stephen Moffat suggested that this be changed to have Brian encourage them to go with the Doctor, providing a less somber and more subtle lead-in to Amy and Rory's final adventure. Speaking of, The Angels Take Manhattan originally featured the Daleks as the main villain instead, but it was decided that the Weeping Angels were a better fit for Amy and Rory's final story, giving it more emotional, personal farewell rather than a big action set piece. The Snowmen went through significant changes during development too. It was originally planned that this special would be the first episode to not have an opening credits sequence, instead opening with the title superimposed over a scene. In pre-production, it was decided to have one, and a newly redesigned title sequence and theme were arranged. But some consideration was given to providing no on-screen title at all, since it was thought that the title sequence might be held off until the end of the episode, illustrating the Doctor's return to his old self. And another rumor suggests that the original concept for the new companion was that she was going to be a Victorian governess. Over the next few months, however, the production team reconsidered the difficulty of writing a regular character who was more than a century behind the viewing audience. I would be so fine with that. I've been saying on this channel for years that I feel like, the Victorian governess Clara was a more interesting Clara than the 7B Clara we got. Clara and 12 are peak Doctor Who in my books, but I really would have liked them to take a swing like this. Could it have worked? A Victorian governess companion? You tell me, let me know in the comments. The Bells of St. John had one major edit towards the end of the episode. The Doctor would have been looking at images of Oswin in Victoria-era Clara when the TARDIS phone rang again. A whispered female voice on the line implored the Doctor to trust Clara and take her with him. This would replace an earlier alternate version of a scene which took place after Clara was attacked by the Spoonhead, with a voice telling the Doctor, "Run, you clever boy, and save her." The whispered female voice would have presumably been Missy's, setting up her arc much earlier. Journey to the Center of the TARDIS initially started with Steve Thompson thinking back to his days as a teacher, and coming up with a story where the TARDIS crashed into a school trip, unleashing a gaggle of teenagers onto the time machine who cause it to malfunction. Stephen Moffat allegedly disliked the idea, so Thompson suggested replacing the students with a salvage team, giving us the episode we got. Speaking of Moffat, he was originally going to write the Crimson Horror, but was most likely too busy to his commitments to the 50th anniversary script, and called on Mark Gatiss to do so. For Nightmare in Silver, Neil Gaiman mentions in an interview that he wanted to set it at a beach where Cybermen would rise out of the ocean, but due to budget constraints, this never happened. Alright, here's some big ones. The name of the Doctor and the day of the Doctor went through a lot of dramatic changes as well. Matt Smith's contract actually ended with Series 7, meaning he had to go through the usual guest star negotiations despite having 2 episodes left in him. As a backup plan, in case he and the previous Doctors who were the primary guest stars weren't able to come to terms, an alternate ending was written. At the end of the name of the Doctor would completely vanish from the space-time continuum after rescuing Clara, leading into the 50th that hinged upon Clara remembering the Doctor back into existence. Yes, Jenna Coleman almost had to basically carry the entire 50th anniversary by herself. That is so insane, and I would have loved to have read that script. In an interview in 2015, Stephen Moffat confirmed a long-term rumor that the War Doctor was only created because Christopher Eccleston amicably refused to play the 9th Doctor. If Eccleston had said yes, the story would have been different, with 9 having only just regenerated. After Eccleston turned the show down, Paul McGann was the second choice, but this was allegedly halted due to the fact that the BBC felt he was not famous enough. After creating the War Doctor, it was decided to film The Night of the Doctor with McGann in order to show how the 8th Doctor became the War Doctor. Moffat originally ended the 50th script with the Moment talking to 11 at the National Gallery, but to have a part for Tom Baker to play in the special, Moffat created the character of the Curator, giving us one of the most iconic scenes in Doctor Who's history. Now, before we talk about Matt Smith's final episode, I should mention this. In a 2018 interview, Stephen Moffat revealed that Tennant very nearly stayed on to play the 10th Doctor for one more year. That's right, we almost had David Tennant for Series 5. Moffat's version of Series 5 would have been radically different. He explained, "My version of that series would have the 10th Doctor crash into the back garden about to regenerate, and the little Amelia would help him get back into the TARDIS and fly off. And then she'd meet him again when she grew up, but he'd have no memory of that because we come to realize that the Doctor was from the future. We'd make our way through the series to the point where the Doctor gets back to that." Moffat noted that he did later reuse this idea for Series 6, but maybe to lesser effect. Okay, now on to Matt Smith's last episode. For the time of the Doctor, rumour has it there was an effort made to hide the news that Matt Smith would be leaving the show, and thus making his regeneration a twist ending. But an apparent email leak for the next Doctor's first series scrapped this. Had it been kept a secret, the central revelation that 11th was actually the last of the Doctor's lives would have been far more dramatic, since the audience wouldn't know if they were getting a surprise grand finale for the show or a regeneration. Another rumour suggests that Stephen Moffat had originally planned an entire Series 8 with the 11th Doctor set almost entirely on Trenzalore, but Matt Smith's decision to step back from the role after Series 7 threw a kink into those plans. So instead, Moffat took most of his ideas for that version of Series 8 and condensed them into one hour-long episode. During the regeneration scene, Moffat initially hoped to include cameo appearances by many of the 11th Doctor's friends. Apart from Clara, these included Amy Pond, Rory Williams, River Song, Brian Williams, Madame Vastra, Jenny Flint, Commander Strax, Dorian, plus Craig Owens, his wife Sophie, and their son Alfie, or Stormageddon Dark Lord of all. It was decided that only Amy would appear, giving us a beautiful, heartbreaking final moment between the 11th Doctor and the first companion he saw with his eyes. The 11th Doctor's era was shaped by compromise, last-minute decisions, and stories that were rewritten, reimagined, and sometimes completely abandoned. For a show that almost got cancelled, to a 50th anniversary that nearly starred Clara by herself, the Smith era came terrifying close to not happening at all. But through all those changes, all those near misses and what-ifs, we got bow ties, fish fingers and custard, we got Amy and Rory and River, and the Impossible Girl. And we got proof that Doctor Who can exist past David Tennant, even if nowadays it doesn't feel like that so much. Thanks for watching everyone, and be sure to subscribe for more of Doctor Who's untold stories, and click on this video because YouTube thinks you'll like it. And I do too. I actually have a good hunch about this one. This video right here, ooh, it's a banger.